Flabob Airport was founded in 1925. It's one of the oldest airports in the state of California. In fact, I believe it's the second oldest continuous airport in the state of California. It wasn't always called Flabob Airport, as we mentioned a little earlier. It was originally the Riverside Airport. And it was built in the floodplain of the Santa Ana River, which caused undue problems because in those days there were no flood dikes. And so the little scrubby flying field that was Riverside Airport frequently flooded, and over time they'd have to move it to higher ground, move it back, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't exactly an airport with great infrastructure. It was a cow pasture that frequently flooded. We had a very unique character who was attracted to Flabob. His name was Roman Warren. Roman actually was a Riverside County supervisor, but not your average politician. Roman ran an equestrian center down here in the river bottom, and he was quite taken with flying. So he brought his own World War I veteran vintage Thomas Morris Scout, which was a really cool little fighter biplane from World War I. And that was his personal airport that he set up really in sort of a shed at the original Riverside Airport. And off he went. And like everybody in aviation at that time, he was starving to death and trying to figure out a way to make a living. So he took his Tommy Morris Scout and he would fly all over Riverside, and he would do such things as buzz the Easter sunrise service on the top of Mount Rubidoux. And then he came up with a gimmick where he actually flew his aircraft under the Santa Ana River Bridge. Now, I'm not talking about the Brooklyn Bridge. This is a very low bridge, not too much clearway. In fact, when he flew underneath the bridge, he had about 4 feet of space between the top and the riverbed. But he recognized that this would bring out a lot of people, so his idea was he'd start out by doing a bunch of stunts to bring the people out to the cow pasture, and then he flew under the bridge, and that became somewhat of a money maker for him because he would do that. He also took his show on the road as a barnstormer. However, it's really difficult to travel with a bridge, so he made a mock-up bridge that he would put his wife on top of, waving a flag, and off they would go. So Roman Warren, the cowboy aviator, was well known for the start of Riverside Airport, the original Riverside Airport. The airport then went on, like most airports in the 20s and 30s, to struggle along. Again, it never became more than a cow pasture. We are very proud of the fact, though, that we actually had commercial airline service in the middle of Prohibition that was designed to bring booze from Tijuana into Riverside. So that was fairly successful until the pilots had a bad day in an overloaded airplane and ran it into a thorn bush. So the airport, again, just kind of struggled along for many, many years. But it did become a place where people without a lot of money who wanted to build an airplane or have a hangar or be involved with aviation could come. Because, again, it was not controlled by a municipality or anything else. It was a private airport. It's always been a private airport. And over the years, many really famous people in aviation wound up getting their start at Flabob Airport. And so, again, always the place where a guy with an idea in his head and a design could come and cobble it together and fly it. And many successful aviation careers were started right here in Flabob that went on to become very, very successful in other places. As the years went by, Flavio Madariaga and Bob Bogan, following in the World War II vintage, bought the airport, put their two first names together to make the name Flabob. So it quit being Riverside Airport and became Flabob. Also, about this time, the city of Riverside built Arlington Airport, which was down the Santa Ana River, and now is Riverside Municipal Airport. So for a while, there were two Riverside airports, the new Arlington Airport and the old, essentially, Riverside Airport that became Flabob. There was an incident at the airport, and the fire department went to the wrong airport, and they said, we gotta have a different name, so that's when the name Flabob occurred. So that's been the history of Flabob. I must say that Flabob has always been a place where things were scrounged. So Flavio Madariaga, who was one of the original owners after Roman Warren passed on, was the world's greatest scrounger, and he would go around and find things and drag them into Flabob at no particular cost. For instance, one day he was flying over the desert out to the east in the Desert Training Center where Patton had trained troops going into World War II, and he noticed a lot of activity on the ground around giant crates on the ground. And so in those days, he simply landed his aircraft, walked up, "What's up, guys?" These were shipping crates that were made for Sherman tanks that were shipped out to the Desert Training Center in World War II, and they were getting ready to demolish the crates. Flavio made a deal where he swapped the guys an airplane for the shipping crates. The great scrounger, Flavio, again decided and heard that when they were disassembling Camp Hahn, which was a huge military post directly next to March Field here in Riverside after World War II, that they were giving away surplus buildings to farmers. Well, Flavio really wasn't much of a farmer, but he went out and scrounged up a donkey and some chickens and some goats and convinced somebody that he was a farmer, and then he started bringing in buildings, actually, that were sited at Camp Hahn and bringing them into Flabob. An example of that today is if you go to our cafe, I understand that was originally a wash house for Camp Hahn, now completely reconstructed and done into a very nice cafe. But again, the consummate scrounger built Flabob by getting whatever he could do. Now, we've sort of carried on that tradition here at Flabob. Well after Flavio's era, into the Wathen era and the time when I was working here at Flabob. Every time we would hear of an airport that was being shut down or closing in the Southern California area, we would go out and scrounge whatever we could. So for instance, when Rialto Airport, which was a flourishing airport until about 15 years ago, was getting ready to shut down, we heard that they were going to demolish all of their hangars. These were really nice metal hangars. And so they had a contract to demolish them. We heard about that, went out and beat on their door forever until they agreed to give us the hangars. The only problem was we had to disassemble them, move them to Flabob, and reassemble them. And as city governments will do, when they finally gave us the green light to do that, we had about a month and a half to disassemble and move 57 hangars, which we did. And they're in Flabob today, freshened up, painted, and completely filled up with tenants who are quite happy to have them. The other great scrounge that we did was the home of our A&P school for the Spartan School of Technology. Originally, the main components of that was a flight line hangar at March Field that was built in 1929. This is a huge building. And they actually built 8 of these hangars. You can still see the remaining 7. And for whatever reason, the Air Force decided to demolish one of them. When we heard that, we were out there and convincing them that we needed to move that giant hangar to Flabob. We were a little bit frustrated with asbestos and red lead paint issues, but we got the parts we wanted, and we brought it to Flabob, and we built it back to look exactly like it looked in 1930 when it was finished at March Field, Army Air Corps Base. So it has its classic yellow and black checkerboard roof from that time, and in an homage to what it was, we actually put an Army Air Corps star on it, and for the public designated it as the original Hangar 8, March Field, 1929. So we're very proud of that hangar and its historic background. And history, again, is very, very important to us at Flabob, and we try to get as many historic items as we can, as you can see in the background here behind me, both the Wathen racers and other things. And we find that in our programs with young people, that history is extremely important, particularly aviation history. And in looking forward, we have plans to build several museums that are funded and ready to come out of the ground that, again, will celebrate aviation history for our youth programs. And like everything on Flabob, they'll be accessible, open to the public, not hard to get into, and we'll enjoy sharing that with absolutely everybody. The one other thing that I just like to point out about Flabob, if you have a chance to come out and tour with us, when you come into the main entranceway to Flabob Airport, you'll find a children's park. And in that children's park is a classic C-47 aircraft on static display. Lots of grass, picnic areas, barbecue areas, and a playground. Well, there aren't a whole lot of airports that when you drive in the gate, the first thing you see is a playground. So why'd we do that? We did that because, again, we want to welcome the people of Riverside, and specifically the children of Rubidoux, and invite them to come unfettered by security and all the usual things that block airports, to come into Flabob, see it as their own. We have families who now come in pushing strollers, having picnics, playing on the playground, and from there they'll move on to look at the airplanes and sit down and enjoy Flabob for what it is. So again, outreach to the community is extremely important to us, and that's why we have the park.